And it's a great pleasure to introduce our next guest on our New Zealand Sporting History segment, joined by the sailing professor, as I have mentioned, Dr. Mark Orams. It's a wonderful title, who had an incredible career. We're going to hear all about his career in sailing. 12 New Zealand titles over a range of different classes. New Zealand Yachtsman of the Year, as a member of the Steinlager 2 crew, which won the 1989-90 Whitbread Round the World Yacht Race. Remember those heady days? All the talk was about the Whitbread. And also a member of Team New Zealand's America's Cup defences in 2000, 2003, and national youth selector and Olympic sailing coach as well. Boy, what a career. And now you're into academia, you're a scientist, and now what's your latest title?
Oh, kia ora, Mark. Yeah. My position I have now at AUT is the Deputy Vice-Chancellor Research, and it's a great privilege to be involved in New Zealand's youngest university and to have the opportunity to just engage with this amazing range of researchers and scholars that we have at our university.
Yeah. So you grew up as a sailor and then you went to uni and did a science degree, is that correct?
Yeah, environmental sciences, particularly marine sciences, is what fascinated me, and I fell in love with the sea just through my passion for surfing and sailing and windsurfing and exploring with the snorkel, and so decided to pursue that as a university qualification, and then eventually post sort of professional sailing decided to go back to university and do postgraduate work with a view to becoming an academic.
So when did you start? And it was almost always was small boat sailing before you got onto the Whitbread and things like that.
Yeah, and while my family name's strongly associated with sailing, my father was actually a music teacher and not a sailor at all, and my mum a primary school teacher, also not a sailor. So I got into sailing sort of almost by accident. Dad decided to buy a little aluminium dinghy for myself and my two brothers and him to just explore things out on the water. And the little dinghy he purchased secondhand just happened to come with a sail and a centerboard and rudder. And so I just put that together and went out on my own, not really knowing anything about sailing, and immediately just fell in love with it. I just sort of something to this day I can't really describe about connecting with the invisible force of nature, with the wind, and connecting with the waves and the sea, and just the sensation of being kind of at one with something bigger than yourself captured me as a youngster, and I feel very, very fortunate that that's still something that's very special to me personally, even today.
Well, yeah, I mean, as you allude, the Orams name is huge in the marine, particularly in the Auckland area. So is that another branch of the family? Or?
Yeah, my uncle Alan Orams, who was my father's cousin, established Orams Marine in the late 50s in Whangarei. And so he sold that business in the 1980s, but the family name was well established in Orams Marine by then. So it is my family name, even though I don't and haven't had anything directly involved with Orams Marine. So it's just sort of one of those family connection things that's kind of serendipitous, I suppose.
So you went through the grades as a young sailor, competing?
Yeah, just it doesn't take long when you're out there sailing that you find yourself with another yacht somewhere close by, and pretty quickly that leads to, well, maybe I can make this go faster than they're going. And so that competitive spirit just occurs naturally, really.
And that was not on the shore?
Yeah, so out of Torbay Sailing Club's where I learned to sail as a teenager, and where I still live. And my children have gone through there, and it's still my home club, and I feel a very strong affinity with that wonderful little bay on the northern east coast bays of Auckland. But yes, so as time went on, got more interested in racing, and then figuring out how to build boats and put them together and make them go fast, and that just opened up a whole world of opportunities.
I mean, it's amazing to think that era of the 70s, particularly late 70s into the 80s, when Sir Peter Blake and Grant Dalton were battling it out. I can remember them coming down the coast side by side virtually in one of those races. And I mean, those epic cruises around the world had the crowd going, didn't they? The New Zealanders loved that stuff.
Yeah, it captured me as a teenager because, of course, the idea of adventuring, sailing these yachts amongst icebergs and seeing whales and going around Cape Horn and, listening to the warbling interviews that Peter Montgomery did with Peter Blake, it just had a fascination for me. And so it was something that I dreamed of but never really thought I would have the opportunity to realise that dream.
Because you're a small boat sailor, you would think, well, you're not going to be on the big boats. But...
Yeah, and I didn't have the experience. I didn't have the background, even though I had the dream. So the opportunity that Peter Blake gave me is as he did for so many other people. He just gave an opportunity. And when that opportunity came my way, I was, and still am, forever grateful for that, because it gave me the opportunity to live out a childhood dream with a childhood hero. Yeah. And so I was conscious from day one of just what an enormous privilege that was, and I kept telling myself just to shut up and listen and learn as much as I possibly could, and just to soak it all up. And not only was Sir Peter Blake a great sailor and a great navigator, he was also an amazing leader. And having the opportunity to be a part of his teams and to learn from his leadership and his ability to pull together an incredibly synergistic sort of magic sense of doing something incredible and successful in a very difficult, challenging environment was something incredibly special.
Well, we'll find out a bit more about that, and of course we're going to have a look at the America's Cup and your experience there and the most recent event, which has been so exciting. But right now, let's check out the headlines at 25 to 3. Sorry, we're a bit late, Marama.
That's fine. Thank you, Mark. Additional security measures have been introduced on Auckland's bus and train network following the fatal stabbing on a bus in Onehonga yesterday. Firefighters are still working to bring a blaze under control in a forestry block near Oxford, west of Christchurch. The Turkish military has struck sites in Iraq and Syria linked to the Kurdish militant group PKK, which the government blames for a deadly attack in the Turkish capital. And Disney film Moana 2 is set to be released in both English and Te Reo next month. We'll have more news at 3.
Saturday night requests kick off at 7, playing the music you've asked for. And in Late Night Phil, we celebrate Bill Wyman's 88th birthday with some live tracks from his Rhythm Kings.
It was a teenage wedding and the old folks wished them well. I got a woman way over town. It's good to me. You ain't got a jump jive and you wait away.
Bill Wyman's Rhythm Kings and Saturday night requests from 7 on RNZ National.
It is 24 minutes to 3. I'm Mark Leishman in for Jesse, and we've got Mark Orams with us talking sailing, his amazing career, and we just before Marama's headlines, we talked about Sir Peter Blake, and I'd like to talk a bit more about him, of course. But when did you actually first meet Peter?
I actually first met him when I decided to take some initiative and call him up and ask him for some advice about how I might get selected to do the Whitbread Round the World Yacht Race, because I'd been trying and had no luck. And I thought, well, if anybody knows how to make this happen, it's a person named Peter Blake. And so I found out a contact number for him and just picked up the phone and called, not expecting at all to have the opportunity to talk to my childhood hero. And the receptionist sort of answered the phone, and I explained who I was and why I'd really appreciate the opportunity to talk to Peter Blake. And much to my surprise, she said, "One moment," and at the other end of the phone there was a Peter Blake here. And so I then, heartbeat started to race, and took a deep breath and really just explained to him what I wanted to have the opportunity to perhaps get his advice on. And I was just a small boat sailor.
Did he ask about your own sort of career at that point?
No, he didn't at all. In fact, he said two things to me on the phone. He said, "Well, why don't you send me in a copy of your CV, and why don't you come in on Friday and we'll have a cup of tea and have a chat about it." And so I said, "Thank you very much, that'd be wonderful." And so I hand-delivered my CV and to the receptionist sort of in the next hour, and then spent the next 3 days planning on what I'd say to Peter Blake on Friday when I got to meet him. Even did practice in the mirror, and I was living at home at the time, and sort of did a practice run with my mum. How does this sound? And so I finally got to go in there on the Friday and meet Sir Peter Blake, my childhood hero. And it was one of those memorable, very ordinary conversations over a cup of tea where I was sort of looking for the opportunity to give my sales pitch, as it were, about who I was and so on. But I didn't get the chance. It was just, we had a cup of tea and he was chatting about ordinary things. And I remember he said, "Oh, do you have any food dislikes? And I said, yeah, I hate onions. And he said, oh, well, I hate macaroni cheese. I mean, it was just a very ordinary conversation. And then as I was trying to, again, look for my opening, I saw him put his cup of tea down and sort of stand up. And I thought, oh, okay, that's my cue. And he reached out and shook my hand and said, well, thank you very much. I wish you all the best of luck. It's been nice meeting you. So I went out of that meeting quite despondent. Firstly, I was excited about having the opportunity to meet Peter Blake. But thinking, I haven't got a hope. I haven't got a hope of doing this thing called the Round the World Yacht Race.
How old were you at this point?
Mid-20s.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so it was a real surprise that afternoon where I got a phone call from Peter Blake, and he said to me, oh, it was wonderful to meet you this morning. Thank you for your time. He thanked me for my time. Could you come in on Monday? Because I'd really like to chat to you about opportunities and things like that. And so I said to him, Peter, I'll come in at 2 a.m. if you want me to. I'll do anything to get involved in the Round the World Yacht Race, sweep the floors, clean the toilets. I don't care. And then I put the phone down and immediately started to wonder, well, what is it that he wants to talk to me about on Monday morning? And quite honestly, I thought he was going to say to me on Monday, listen, I know you're keen. We can't afford to pay you, but if you're prepared to come in and sweep up and help out around the place as a volunteer, that'd be great. So I fully expected that. And it was one of those moments, Mark, that you look back on in your life and you realise that, there was a real turning point there, a fork in the road, if you like. And so I came back in, and at this stage I knew the receptionist by name. Hello, Celia. Hello, Mark, she said. And so she called through and the door opened to Peter Blake's office. And he's a large and
big boy, yes,
he's 6'4" and very Viking-like, and he strode across the reception area and he looked me in the eye, put out his hand, shook my hand and said, welcome aboard. I'd like you to join us for the next Round the World Yacht Race on Steinlager 2.
Goodness.
So, I mean, I was just catching flies, right? I just couldn't say anything. And Peter just threw back his head and laughed and laughed and laughed. And
this was Steinlager 2.
This was Steinlager 2, yeah. I was the 15th and last person chosen, the least experienced of anybody in that team.
He liked what he saw, Mark. He liked what he saw.
Yeah, I saw him do this often, Mark, where when he was putting together teams, he always prioritised attitude over everything else. He prioritised that over experience, over skills, over qualifications. And so what he saw in me in retrospect was somebody who, this wasn't just a job. This wasn't just an opportunity. This was a long-standing childhood dream, a deep-seated burning desire. And he knew that with that kind of motivation, that is the sort of person that creates a great team. And so, one of those not only great opportunities, but really important life lessons that Sir Peter Blake gifted to me.
I was very fortunate to be part of a film crew. There was only 3 of us who followed him around Australia with the Steinlager 1 campaign, which was the one prior to your Steinlager 2. And he was kind of like a head prefect, wasn't he? I mean, he had real control. And there's some pretty, you joined a crew with the likes of Brad Butterworth and Tony Ray and Kevin Shoebridge, Ross Field, big names in the sport.
Absolutely.
And kind of crusty, a lot of those guys. They wouldn't...
Yeah, and they didn't suffer fools, right?
No.
It was quite an intimidating environment to go into. But you're back to your point about Peter. He was both a part of, but also apart from the team. His leadership style was really interesting. He was never really one of the boys, but he was always, in terms of humour, absolutely an integral part of it. But you knew who the leader was. And you knew in the end that while he would value everybody's opinions and deliberately seek those opinions out, in the end, the key decisions were his to make. And it was our job to fall behind those decisions, whether we agreed with them or not. So, he was both a strong leader, but a very involved leader as well. He certainly drew the wisdom and talent from the team. So he wasn't autocratic and top-down in that sense, but you certainly knew who the leader of the team was.
Was it a huge disappointment to him when Brad Butterworth and Russell Coates decided to pull the pin, as it were?
Well, I think it would have been, but unfortunately Peter had passed away by that time. So, I mean, it's always hard to speculate on what somebody would have felt. But I know that for Peter, both the Whitbread Round the World Yacht Race and especially the Team New Zealand success was very much about trying to maximise New Zealand's opportunity for the New Zealand sailing and marine community, but for New Zealand as well. So, I think he would have been quite torn by the way that things have gone. He would have understood the commercial realities of sport, and now in the 21st century, just how difficult it is to raise money, because he's been in that. He'd been
one
in
of the
that
great
position,
fundraisers, wasn't it? Really?
Yeah. So I think he would have perhaps understood, but lamented the fact that things had moved away from something that was truly New Zealand based for the benefit of New Zealand and New Zealanders.
Yeah. So the America's Cup now, you've watched the most recent one up in the middle of the night. Your take from that? I mean, it looked at one stage like it was going to be a complete walkover.
Yeah, I think my reflections on it is it's a wonderful continuation of the legacy that, pointing back to Sir Peter Blake, of course, Team New Zealand was formed by Alan Sefton and Peter Blake in the early 90s. And so for that team to now, that he co-formed, to now be the most successful team in America's Cup history is really something quite special. And it's not lost on me the connection to the whakapapa. Of course, both Kevin Shoebridge, as the 2IC or Chief Operating Officer in Team New Zealand, was a watch captain on Steinlager 2, was on Lion. Grant Dalton was on Lion New Zealand as one of Sir Peter Blake's selected watch captains. So, those two leaders sort of served their apprenticeships, if you like, under Sir Peter Blake and learned and developed their own leadership style as a consequence. So that legacy is really strong. And so I think there's an enormous amount of pride from my own personal point of view that New Zealand sailing is still on top. And I look at sailing as a high, especially in the America's Cup, it's a high technology, huge resources game. And here we are, a little country of 5 million people, and we can take on superpowers that have got massive multi-billion-dollar companies like Boeing and organisations like NASA and Red Bull Formula One teams and Mercedes and all the rest of it. This is little old New Zealand. We don't even have a car manufacturing company here, right?
Yeah.
And yet we can do it. We can take on...
Why is that, do you think? What is the answer?
I think it's the very special Kiwi nature of our team. That there is something that other countries cannot replicate, and that's the essence of who we are. Yeah. And who we are is a country that is incredibly egalitarian. We don't have a hierarchy. Or at least we resist any temptation to hierarchy. The negative side of that's the tall poppy syndrome. But what it means in the context of a team environment is you have this incredible synergy, this special magic where everybody in the team feels like they matter. Everybody in the team, doesn't matter whether you're the receptionist or the person cleaning the toilets or the head designer or the CEO, everybody is valued. Everybody's opinion and work counts and contributes to the greater good and performance of the team. That was the Sir Peter Blake ethos, and it continues on today within Team New Zealand. They are tight. They are a tight, committed, hardworking team who prioritise everything about how do we make the boat go faster and how do we win this regatta. And that's really difficult for other countries to replicate. So, and I like to think of that as something, Mark, that's a really important and empowering lesson for us as a nation. We've got lots of challenges and lots of struggles that we go through. But the essence of who we are as a people is something very, very special. And we should never forget that. We should never be feeling inferior because of our isolation or our size or some of the challenges that we face. We're a very, very special country that has this amazing maritime heritage. We were settled by the greatest ocean navigating culture in the history of humankind, and the Pacific peoples who came to and from our islands and these wonderful waka haurua, navigating with these amazing... It's an incredible history that we have. And that's something I'd like to think that we can be really proud of. We're unique, we're special, and we see that come to the fore sometimes in sport.
Where do you see the America's Cup going next? I mean, not pinpointing which city or which harbour. It's obviously not going to be New Zealand by all accounts. So where do you think the next progress will be?
I think no question the technology will continue to advance. If we think about where we've come from since we first won the Cup in 1995 off San Diego, and NZL 32 was an amazing boat, really, really quick, but reality was it sailed at a speed that was a fast walk, right? And now Sort of
fly.
30 years later, we've got boats that have been powered by the wind that are sailing as fast as you can drive down the motorway. Now you have to wear crash helmets and impact vests and, have oxygen and things.
And ride a bike.
Yeah, it's becoming more and more akin to flying than it is to actually
Has that
traditional
taken
sailing.
something away? I was thinking, watching this current series, you're seeing little helmets basically sticking up, and that's about it. Whereas in the old days, you saw the sailors rushing up and down. And
Yeah, I think, that perhaps more traditional, and there's an age-related thing here too, right? Older sailors would kind of miss the old school complexity of spinnakers going up and down and, a cast of thousands running around the deck doing things. But actually, I'm extremely excited about what the sport has become.
is it a sport for the modern age, basically?
Oh, absolutely. And this is the point, I think, for somebody of my age in sailing, that the way we used to sail doesn't excite 12, 13, 14-year-olds, right? What excites them is the ability to fly above the surface of the water at massive speeds and the risk and the excitement that comes with that. That's
On these foil boards. With,
exactly. That's what excites them. And so, yeah.
And you do that yourself, don't you?
Oh, yeah. Well, old dog, new tricks. I'm trying, Mark. I'm trying.
Is it hard? Is it tricky to pick up?
It's hard enough to make it enthralling and captivating, right? Because the challenge keeps you motivated. It's not, but it's not so difficult that you feel like you're too old and it's impossible. So I'm absolutely loving it. It's this whole new world, and it's a wonderful thing to get into, and the sensation's incredible.
Yeah.
To
The
fly
speed.
above the surface of the
imagine.
water it's the complete
Something else.
opposite to sort of all your instincts. In the old days, the faster you went, the more violent the movement got, and the more you got splashed in the face by the waves, and the louder it got. Now, when you're foiling, it's quiet.
Yeah.
You're above all of that. You're
Skimming
actually,
across the ocean.
You are, because you can't see the foil. You are actually got the sensation of I am flying on this little wee board, holding this small wing with the power of the wind. It's an incredible thing.
The sailors, how do they feel about good cyclists being on board doing their bit? Is that going to continue, do you think?
Well,
Cyclaws?
I can only express my own view on it, but I suspect that many of my other sailing colleagues would feel the same, and that is there's huge respect and admiration for the physical abilities and the athletic prowess of the cyclaws, and people like Hamish Bond, you just go, oh my gosh, that guy is one of the greatest athletes, if not the greatest athlete that our nation has ever produced. But when you see people who've never even sailed a boat before, and quite frankly, they just head down, maximising, redlining it for as long as they can, which in itself has got kind of an admiration. But in terms of what does it add to the sailing, from a sailor's perspective, the answer is nothing. So especially when you know that actually, and again, this is no disrespect to the hard work that they put in and the amazing athletes that they are, but their job can be done by a battery. So we don't need them to make these yachts go the way they do. And because they're now tucked down, I mean, the only reason they're not covered up and sitting down below is because the rules say that you have to have an open thing, or else from an aerodynamic perspective, you wouldn't even see them. So, they're almost like a modern slave ship. I feel for them. They're just absolutely thrashing themselves. So
you're saying the battery power will come into fore and take care of the hydraulics in the future?
That's what they have on the AC40s already.
Right.
And if you looked at the Youth and Women's America's Cup, you would say, well, did you miss the cyclists not being on those boats?
So how many will be on the boat? In the future?
If it was my choice, I'd say 6. I put 6 sailors on board, so that's 2 up from the 4 sailors at the moment, and that just gives the opportunity to spread the workload a little bit and have a little bit more strategic thinking. Probably safety point of view might be a bit helpful too. Also, the potential opportunity to bring in women into the crew would be really something I think well overdue. So I don't see the need for continuing with cyclaws when all of the functioning on the boat can actually be managed by a battery. So that's one of the steps forward. The boats will be lighter, no doubt. They'll go faster in the future. I do wonder in 30 years' time, will we see even the need for foils? Will we see sort of the technology develop to a point where the ground effect that allows albatross to soar on the surface of the water for for hours and hours and hours without flapping the wings at all. If we get something akin to that, where
Using the thermals.
it's almost got a George Jetson style, isn't it? Where it's very space age.
Hovercraft.
But we're 21st. You're exactly right. That's what hovercraft do. They use the power of the downforce. Now that has to be created by an engine, but the downforce of air to lift them above the surface. So, perhaps in 30 years that might be where it ends up.
But in your heart of hearts, still go back to that little boat with the tin boat with the sail that you discovered with your dad all those years ago. That's the essence of it all.
Yeah, well, yes, and that while I'm foiling on a little wing foiling board, I also have a Zephyr, which is a little single person boat designed by a great New Zealand sailor and designer named Des Townsend in 1958. It's slow. It's a very slow boat, but it's a beautifully balanced little boat. And I love sailing that and racing it. It just sort of connects me with something I fell in love with as a 13-year-old. And, in my 60s, the chance to do that now and still get that same sensation and that same joy, I just feel incredibly blessed.
Yeah. Can you imagine what no, you can't, but let's put the question anyway, hypothetically. Sir Peter Blake, what would he be thinking now of the way it's all gone?
I think he'd love it. He was always captured by technology and advances and really interested. Sort of his engineering head was very much oriented that way. So I think he'd be fascinated by where things had got to. He would also, I think, remind us of the need to continue to think about the people, to continue to be proud of and to emphasise the New Zealand way of doing things that mattered to him. It was a key ingredient to his success. And I think also he would have moved to very much sort of an elder statesman, mentor kind of role. You could see he was already going there. He would have made a great Governor General, Mark.
Yes.
Obviously I have a huge amount of respect for Sir Peter Blake, and there are so many things that I think about that he would have done. He would have become the Jacques Cousteau of my kids' generation, right? And we desperately need that kind of environmental leadership, and that's what he had dedicated the rest of his life to. So on the one hand, I feel quite sad for the loss of Sir Peter and all that he'd yet to achieve. But on the other hand, I just feel deeply grateful for his life and his contributions that he does make and the opportunity.
And we must say as well, I suppose, Grant Dalton. I mean, you've sailed with Grant, and he's a guy who's taken a lot from Sir Peter in many respects, his ability to raise money, which is what drives him.
Yeah, Dalton's a very different leader than Peter Blake, and I think he'd be the first to admit that. But he does have some similarities, yes, the ability to raise money and understanding that that's job one, because without that and without looking after your sponsors, you don't have a team, you don't have a boat, you don't have a campaign. He also understands the importance of team. And so putting the team first and making sure that he feels the responsibility as the leader for all of the team, all of the families that they support, and the wider team are the sponsors and the suppliers and the supporters as well. So he absolutely has Peter Blake's sort of approach there. He's a lot less diplomatic than Peter Blake. Daltz is a very straight shooter, he shares this with Peter too, incredibly determined. They never give up. And despite what some people might say, Daltz is a very proud New Zealander and a very proud New Zealand yachtsman, and that's been important to him throughout his career. Similarities, but also differences in terms of just his brashness and in some cases his don't care what other people think. We're going ahead and doing it this way because that's what it's going to take to win. I think Peter was probably a bit more politically astute, a bit more of a gentleman, perhaps, if you like, than Daltz. But it's an interesting comparison. No question that Grant Dalton is a very smart individual, very determined, and he is very respectful of the history of Team New Zealand. I know within the team they still
I'll always
think
remember
about
that
Blakey.
Whitbread race when they were sailing down. I think I mentioned it before. I think Peter won it. Did he just at the
I was. That was Steinlager 2 versus Fisher and Paykel, and you're right. It was the two Kiwi boats wanting to be first into their home port, and the big squall that came through, and that was one of those memorable moments in sailing history.
Gosh, yes, and the crowds of boats out in the harbour. Now, Peter Blake had a favourite song, didn't he? When you were negotiating those liquid Himalayas that PJ Montgomery would always refer to.
Yes, quite right. by reputation, Blake, he had a terrible taste in fashion and terrible taste in music. But
Good socks.
Yeah. But this Willie Nelson song was something that, for some reason, and I don't really know why, it was a song that perhaps it's just a sing-along song,
Yes.
a song that they used to play when things got really rough in the Round Australia race with Mike Quilter and Peter on Steinlager 1, and then it used to be broken out every now and again to the derision of a lot of younger members of Steinlager 2 in the Round the World race. But yeah, because Peter's no longer here, it's sort of one, whenever I hear it, I always think of him.
We'll play it after 3, actually, in honour of your visit. I remember that time we were filming with Steinlager 1. We had small cameras, the first of them on the boat, and their job was to turn that camera on. It was all on a housing, so it was protected from the weather. And every time he'd go from, say, Sydney to Mooloolaba, and we'd come in and we'd say, where's the footage of the big hits? Oh, the sea was just terrible. It was shocking, Where's the footage? Oh, it was so rough we forgot to turn it on. And so we missed all this wonderful footage. But anyway, it was great fun. But hey, look, Mark, really appreciate you coming in. Thoroughly enjoyed your
pleasure.
visit.
Thanks,
and
Mark.
it's been a heck of a career, hasn't it?
Oh, I've just been so lucky that a sport I fell in love with as a kid I can still enjoy to this day, and I feel very grateful.
Good on you. Thanks so much. That's Dr. Mark Orams, who's my guest through this New Zealand sporting history segment, New Zealand's sailing professor. He knows it all about that wonderful sport, and I'm sure New Zealand's going to continue with its wonderful future in it.